I've had a lot of experiences with the paranormal since I was about 16, but this one is one of my more memorable experiences. When I was about 20, my dad, who was a mechanic, got me a GMC Jimmy. It was my first new car. I'm not sure how old it was because it was basically a mishmash of different SUVs. The glove compartment said it was a Bronco, but the frame said it was a GMC, so I assumed it had been in some sort of accident if the frame and inside were different. I asked my dad, but he said he got it at an auction, so he really didn't know the history of it. I drove it for a few weeks and had no problems. I thought it was a pretty good car for a beater SUV and for a first car, so I took the time to clean it inside and out. After a few weeks, I remember driving home from one of my jobs. I worked at a Starbucks and was a lifeguard at a few different pools, and looked in the rearview mirror. I saw a child, maybe 7 or 8 years old, with bright orange hair in a bowl cut, sitting right behind me in the center of the back seat. He was smiling and had a small gap in between his teeth. I turned around to look and he wasn't there. I turned back around to look and the rearview mirror fell off. I pulled over because I was on the highway and looked around, but I didn't see anybody. I tried sticking the mirror back up, but it wouldn't stay. I ended up going to get some glue for it, and it still wouldn't stay no matter what I did. I told my dad it had fallen off, and he finally got it to stay after messing with it for a while. I was understandably wary after that and kept checking behind me periodically in the rearview mirror, but nothing happened for a few days. One afternoon, I was driving home from lifeguarding and my driver's side window just fell into the door. I told my dad and he fixed it, and even though at this point I was uncomfortable driving the SUV because of what I had seen, I figured maybe it would have some problems since it was older, so I didn't associate the kid with the problems. My dad fixed the window, but the next night I was driving home at around 11 o'clock after lifeguarding, and my gas pedal fell off. I almost wrecked the SUV because as it happened I was passing some construction, and the lane had shifted due to a path made by one of the road cones. There was a police car behind me and they pulled me over, probably thinking I was drunk. When they came up to my window, they saw me and asked what happened. I showed them the gas pedal and they kind of laughed and told me to get it fixed. I told my dad what had happened when I got home, and he said that even though the SUV was kind of old, it shouldn't be falling apart like it was. I didn't tell him about the kid I saw because I kind of felt like maybe he wouldn't believe me. About a week later, I was driving down the highway to get to work, and the brakes stopped working. I pressed down and nothing happened. I was pretty freaked out, but just let off the gas and steered the SUV to the side of the road. I got it stopped and then walked to a payphone to call my dad. He got there and checked the brake line and said there was no brake fluid in it. At this point, I was done. In my mind, even if it had nothing to do with that kid, I felt like this car was too unsafe to drive. My dad replaced the brakes and the brake system and drove it for a week or so, told me he had no problems with anything and said that it would be okay to drive. I couldn't tell him that I didn't want to drive it because I didn't want to have to explain why, so even though I really didn't want to, I drove it to work. The brakes failed again. It was the same thing. I got my dad to look at the brakes. He said the brake fluid was completely gone, but he couldn't find anything wrong. At that point, he said he didn't want me driving it because he was afraid I would get into an accident. We parked it at our house and let it sit there for a couple of days. My dad said he was going to talk it over with his friend who was also a mechanic and decide what to do with it. After a couple of days, I was sitting in our kitchen, eating lunch, and my dad and brother walked into the house. My brother asked my dad if he'd ever seen a kid with red hair in the SUV. My dad said, "With a bowl cut?" I was so surprised, I just looked at them and said, "Yeah, he's around 7 or 8 years old." Turns out we had all been seeing the same thing. We all talked about what we had seen, and my dad figured that maybe a kid had died in the SUV, and that's why we'd all seen him at some point. We had all seen this kid in the same spot, in the center of the back seat, smiling. We'd all seen him at a glance, but when we would look back, he was gone. My dad had seen him while he was driving the SUV around after the brakes had failed for the first time, and my brother had seen him when he was walking by the SUV to come inside the house. My dad never said anything, but I think maybe after we talked, he thought all the weird stuff that had happened had something to do with the kid. I told my friend who worked at Starbucks, and she said that she wanted to see this SUV. My dad had gone to visit our relatives in Florida, and my brother was living at my aunt's house, so she and I went over to my house to look at it. My friend has had a lot of experiences with the paranormal too, so I figure she would be able to see the kid if he was there. We had spent the day at her house, so we went over there at about 11:30 at night. She pulled into our neighbor's driveway across the street so we could watch the SUV. We didn't see anything, so we just sat there, talking about all the things that had happened with the car. I remember not looking at the SUV the whole time because I just felt uneasy looking at the car. We both looked at the SUV at the same time at one point, and both of us saw the kid sitting in the back seat right in the center. It's so surreal to think about it now, but it was just as surreal back then. I thought it was a person just sitting there because the headlights on my friend's car were shining off the back of the kid's neck. He wasn't moving or anything, just staring straight ahead. I felt like I couldn't move. I was paralyzed. And then the kid's head started to turn to the right, and my friend peeled out of there. I remember my head hitting the headrest. She hit the gas so hard. We didn't really talk about what happened. I guess because it was so scary that it's just not one of those things you want to discuss. You just want to forget that it ever happened. I stayed at my friend's house until my dad came back from Florida. When my dad came back, I told him what my friend and I had seen, and that he needed to get rid of the car. I just didn't want to have anything to do with it after that. I never did find anything in the news about a kid with orange-red hair who was 7 or 8 years old and had been killed in an accident. I'm not sure who my dad gave the SUV to, and I never asked. Back in the fall of 2014, I attended a college in Grayson, Kentucky. I was there on a football scholarship, and because I was on the team, I was required to stay in the football dorm. After a few weeks, I made a friend that lived on the opposite side of campus with his wife and child. After about a month, I got sick of living in the dorms, so I spent most of my nights at my friend's apartment. I moved in with him. At first, it was just two 18-year-old kids from Kentucky playing football, hanging out, and his wife and kid were really nice as well. The kid was about 6 months old at the time and would randomly cry for no reason, like most babies do. Well, when he would start to cry, he would not stop. Then they would put him in this walker to let him cry it out. He would cry and cry and cry until they got to this one corner of the room and he would just stop. This would happen over and over again, and it was always the same spot, too. We thought he might just be seeing something that caught his eye. I mean, who knows? He was a baby. After a while, there was a night that the baby would not go down. Every time they would put him down, he would scream in terror, like someone went in there and punched him. Well, after hours of trying and feedings and diaper checks, he finally went down. At this point, it was 3 in the morning, so we all went to bed. About 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning, I go to use the restroom, which was right across the hall from the baby's room. As I walk by, I can hear what sounds like someone talking to the baby, but the door was shut and there was no light coming from under the door. I thought that was kind of weird, so I opened the door and turned on the light. No one, including the baby, was in the room. Knowing they had a two-way baby monitor, I thought maybe it was coming from there and that maybe their baby was in their room. So I used the restroom and went back to bed. The next day I got up and the baby was in the crib with the door wide open. When my buddy's wife gets up, she asked if I had been in his room and left the door open. I said I had gone in there last night, but shut the door, and maybe they left it open. When they put him back in the crib, after some confusion, still not knowing what happened, we figured out that the baby had gone missing for who knows how long. After that, the baby went to stay at one of the grandparents. After that, about a week after, to be exact, things started to get a little weird. Doors were opening, sounds coming from other rooms, weird noises right behind you. At some point, we got this real bright idea to call a paranormal expert. Asked to get some Bibles and put them in the same room. So we did just that. While we were doing it, we kept hearing noises from the back bedroom, and we realized that the last Bible was in that room. My buddy convinces me to go with him to get it. So, standing about 5 feet from him, mainly to get a head start on whatever happened, we go down the hall. He reaches into the room to get the Bible when the door slams shut, and after some arguing about who did it, we decided that we would stay there that night. After that semester, we both decided we were not coming back. When we went to sign the paperwork at the leasing office, they asked why we were moving. So we told them about some of the stuff that had happened. She says, "Well, I'm surprised it took you this long to figure it out." We asked her what she meant, and she said that she probably shouldn't have said anything. She never told us what we should have figured out, or what was really going on there. Ever since my son was little, he has had some very odd experiences. When he was just a baby, he often smiled and cooed at things that no one could see. But at first I thought, he's a baby and who knows what he's really entertained by. But as he got older, he started talking to someone in his room and playing with them. I thought maybe it was an imaginary friend, but I asked him about it, and he was very matter of fact that it was his friend Austin, that he was there and that he lived in the closet. He even told me what he looked like in vivid detail. Again, I just thought he had a great imagination. He was around 3 at this time, after all. Then one night, in the middle of the night, all of my son's electronic toys started going off in his toy box while everybody was asleep. I went in there thinking he was awake and messing around, but he wasn't. And I tried to shut off these toys, of which there was a toy race car steering wheel that revved up, and a game animal noise thing, and one other talking stuffed animal. I couldn't get them to stop, and I didn't want my son to wake up. It got to the point where I ripped out the batteries of the race car thing, and it still kept going. I freaked a little and threw it out into the yard. When I came back inside, I heard another toy going off, and my son did wake up this time. He calmly told me it was his toy train in the closet, and that Austin loved trains. Sure enough, I found the train in the back of the closet where my son said he had put it for Austin to use because my son didn't like trains himself. I started to believe at that time that he really was interacting with someone, and I didn't know what to say or do. This went on for years, but my son also said and did other things like this. Around this same age, a 17-year-old boy from our neighborhood was in a car accident and died at the intersection we always passed. I didn't know the boy personally, then I never said anything about him dying to my son. But one night we were stopped at the intersection, and my son calmly tells me that a boy died on this road. When I asked him how he knew that, he pointed out the window and said, "Well, because he's standing right there." And then he added, "But it's all right. He's okay now." And of course there was no one standing there to my eyes. I don't know how he would know this unless he really did see him. Then one time when he was with my mom driving, they stopped at a light in front of this wooded area near our house. My mom said that he got very worried and told my mom that there were secrets in those woods and that we could never go in there. When my mom asked him what sort of secrets, he shook his head and said that he wasn't allowed to talk about it. Needless to say, I've never been in those woods after that. There were other things too, but once he entered school, he stopped talking about it, and I didn't know if he remembered it or not. I didn't ask. But when he turned 14, it seemed that it started up all over again. Now he spends most of his free time in this supposedly haunted field near our house, and he said that he's helping people. I really don't think he's crazy or anything, but he says he can talk to ghosts and spirits. I have to say I believe him, because he's told me so many odd things that keep happening, and I've seen it for myself many times. I guess I just wonder a little if this is a good thing or not. But regardless, I'm convinced now that his imaginary friend wasn't so imaginary at all. From the age of 3 until about 8 or 9, I had an imaginary friend, except she wasn't imaginary at all. She was a lovely African American woman by the name of Coco, and she was around her early mid-30s. She wore a blue and white outfit that I think would have resembled an old maid's outfit. My parents were afraid of her because I played with her in my closet, so they didn't even ask me much about her or care to learn more, something that still really annoys me as an adult. Coco was my friend, and she was only ever kind and sweet to me. She played with me and she gave me advice. She was in my life for years, but only ever inside that one house. About a year before we moved out of that house, I was getting made fun of for being almost 10 years old with an invisible friend, so I asked Coco to go away, and she did. I mourned her for a while and then just kind of let it go, but I've never forgotten her face. I would recognize her photo if I saw it now. Some of the strangest parts were that I lived in a house that had been built for my family, so no one had lived or died in the house previously. It was an old farming town though, so I have no idea what was on the land prior to us moving there. Also, being an old farming town in what was then pretty rural Canada, isolated from much of the world, I had never actually seen an African American person in real life at the time that I began seeing Coco, so my parents always thought it was strange that I would invent her as a friend. The first black family moved into town when I was 7 or 8, though of course I might have seen somebody on TV. It was the late 80s. One story that really stands out is one night when I was fighting with my mom over a new bed that I wanted. I claimed that I would not sleep in my old bed any more, and pulled off all the sheets and blankets and slept on the floor. But when I woke up, I was tucked into a perfectly made bed. I don't remember if I asked Coco about it or not, but to this day, my mom swears she didn't make that bed. I'd really love to have a solid answer of whether I somehow invented her to deal with some childhood trauma I had experienced, or if she was truly just a friendly ghost. But either way, she really did enrich my youth and taught me a lot about life. So I was playing with my daughter, doing my best to wear her out before bedtime, as parents do. I was tossing her in the air and she was giggling like a maniac, when all of a sudden she stopped, looked up, and pointed at the skylight. I, thinking that she had just noticed her reflection, said, "Oh, do you see an Ellie in the glass?" She said, "Yeah, Mama, I see Ellie, I see Mama, and I see a man." Naturally, I freaked out, ready to call my husband over so that he could beat the man senseless with a bat or something. I looked at the skylight. No man. So I said, "Ellie, there's no man there, just Mama and Ellie." She said, "The man there too, Mama, right by Mama." She pointed. No man. I'm legit freaking out at this point, but I need to figure out if this is a 911 moment or an exorcist moment. So I screamed at my husband in that sort of way you do when there are kids around and you don't want to scare them. You know, that this is very urgent, so get your ass over here, but I'm using this voice so as not to frighten the children kind of way. I tell him to look at the skylight and tell me if he sees anything. He didn't. I told him what happened, and he went outside to check it out. Unarmed, so I'm not sure what exactly he would have done had there been an actual bad guy. Regardless, he reports back that there's nobody around. All is well. I calm down enough to get my daughter changed and ready for bed. She's running to her room when she stops, turns around, and waves at the skylight, saying, "Night-night, roof man," and bounds into her room. I'm freaking out, and my husband is laughing at me. I thought about having him cover the skylight. Some people told me that maybe she saw my grandfather, so I thought maybe someday I would pull out the photo album. One day, my husband and I both decided to show her pictures. He thinks I'm crazy, and this was partly out of curiosity, but partly to set my mind at ease that I'm not crazy. So he got out the photo album and started with his family. He sat her on his lap and they looked at pictures. She pointed out people she knew and ignored the rest. We moved to my photos. More of the same. We passed over pictures of my grandpa with no reaction from her. I was both relieved and kind of disappointed. My husband had just started to say, "I told you so," when my daughter pointed to a picture of my other grandfather who had passed away when I was 3. She said, "Who's this, Daddy?" And he said, "That's Mama's papa." And she said, "No, that roof man," and pointed up at the skylight. Son was about 2.5 years old when I was renting an old house. He came running out of his room in a fit. He was red-faced and obviously upset and frustrated. It was just he and I who lived in this tiny house, so I was a little confused. He yelled, "Make him play with me." I was stunned and confused. I asked him who he was talking about. He looked very annoyed with me that I would even ask such a stupid question. "The boy in my closet. He won't play with me. Ask him to play with me." He grabbed my hand and dragged me into his room. He had toys strung across the floor. He ran into the closet, pointed angrily inside, and folded his arms tightly across his chest. My son was just mad. The closet door was wide open. There was nothing on the floor inside. I couldn't see anything. I looked back at my son, who was looking at me like, "Well, aren't you going to ask him?" I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to discount what he was experiencing, but I was kind of scared. Out of respect for this possible spirit boy, I explained to my son that perhaps he just didn't want to play today. My son was disappointed, but knelt down and continued to play with his things. As he did, he was mumbling, "He always plays with me, and now he's just sitting there." Many years later, I was talking about the many paranormal things we experienced when he was a kid. He remembered this boy. He recalled that the boy never actually spoke. He was usually just playing with a fire truck. But the weirdest part was that the boy was entirely blue. I don't even know what that means. My oldest son was almost 5 years old when I was pregnant with my second child, a girl. One morning my alarm went off early as usual, 5 o'clock a.m., so I could get some housework done and feed the pigs and goats and chickens. I was done outside and went back in as I knew what time my boy typically woke up. I walked into his room and he was sitting up in bed, wrapped in his quilt. He jumped up and quickly ran and gave me a hug. I laughed and said, "Good morning, hun. Have you been up a long time? You should have came and got me, silly." He looked at me and said, "Mama, I saw the nice man again." I immediately felt adrenaline course through me. What the hell? The fuck do you mean, the nice man? I mean, obviously I didn't say that to him. I thought maybe somebody had been doing something to him or peering in the window. I knelt down and said, "Boy, you need to tell me everything right now about this man. This is not good, so please tell me the truth. Where did he go?" My son said, "He wakes me up a lot. He comes to my door." "What?" I said. "What do you mean? What does he do?" "He just stands and smiles for a long time." I had no words, and I'm sure I looked distressed to him. At this point I was getting chills and just about had tunnel vision. Everything he was saying was so fucked up. I was trying to stay calm and not seem angry so I wouldn't make him shut down. I said, "Okay, well, what does he look like?" "He's up to the ceiling almost, and he has no eyes." He explained that he really had no color, sort of grayish, just holes where the eyes should be. Short hair, I think he said. He continued on trying to calm me down. "Mama, he's nice. I like him. He tells me don't be afraid. He's here a lot." Okay, what else does he say?" "Today he told me I was good and to take care of my sister who was coming." Holy shit, I thought. This is real. There were a few other things I wanted to know, but my boy was getting restless and annoyed with all of my questions. Like, "Come on, Mom, it's not a big deal. Can I go play or what?" Over the next few days, I kept prying, but he wasn't having it. He just said the same things over and over. All he said was, "Don't be afraid. He's a nice man." Last night at 2 a.m., I was woken up by my 9-year-old son crashing into my room, terrified. He said that he was woken up by a machine that was trying to get him. It was the size of an iceberg and had 100 hands covering it from children it had eaten before. It made a loud popping and cracking noise like bones breaking as it moved. He was huddled on the end of my bed, clutching his legs, rocking back and forth. He looks me straight in my eyes and said, "Mom, don't you hear it? Can't you hear all the children counting by hundreds? It's going to get me." I asked him if he was having a bad dream, and he adamantly explained that it was real. He just kept repeating, "It's happening right now. Can't you hear them? Can't you hear the children?" I didn't know what to do, so I hugged him and told him it was going to be okay. I told him the machine couldn't get him if I was there and that I would protect him. Then our new kitten comes running into my room, and she wouldn't leave him alone. She kept trying to snuggle up with him, and he tells me she heard it too. She knows it's out there. She can hear the children. Finally, I get him to calm down by telling him that he can sleep in my room that night. After a few minutes, he says he can hear it leaving, that it was on the roof, and that it was going into the neighbor's house. As he was finally falling back to sleep, he was slowly closing his eyes and asked, "You believe me, Mommy, don't you?" I responded the only way I could think of and said, "Of course I believe you," and fell back asleep. This was the weirdest experience I've ever had as a parent. I couldn't hear the children, but he could. When I was 8 years old, I lived in an apartment complex. All of my friends were playing outside, hide and seek. When I went outside to join them, we all huddled up to pick who was going to be the seeker. There were 6 kids in total, including me. One of my friends was counting to 50 while the rest of us hid. I remember we all ran into the building hallways and went our separate ways and started looking for a hiding place. All of a sudden, I saw a kid at one end of the hallway, moving his hand in a "come with me" motion. At that moment, I thought it was a friend helping me find a spot to hide. When I ran towards him, he turned the corner. When I finally caught up with him, he was hiding under a pair of stairs leading up to the second floor. In my head, I thought, two people hiding under the stairs is obvious, so I ran up the second floor and hid. Eventually, I was caught, and then my friends also got caught, so we all huddled up, and I realized that the kid that I saw under the stairs was missing. I asked my friends if there was one more kid. I told them we had to go find him because he was missing. They said, "It's just us playing. We're all here." At that moment, I realized that I had never actually seen the kid's face, just the orange jacket that he was wearing. I ran back to where I had last seen him, and he wasn't there. I ran to my friends and said, "Didn't you guys see the kid in the hallway with the orange jacket?" They all said no, that we were the only kids running and looking for a hiding spot in the building. After that, I got the chills, and I've never been able to explain what I saw. I was visiting my mom a couple of hours ago, and when I was leaving, I was tidying up as my 1.5-year-old had caused a bit of a mess. My mom lives alone with her dog now since my stepdad passed this past December. I saw my daughter chase after my brother and go down a hallway. I put some dishes away and went after her, and I could hear her laughing in my mom's room. I walked into my mom's room and saw the bathroom door open. In my mom's bathroom, there's a closet that my daughter was trying to open. The doorknobs are the easy to open kind that you just press down on and they open, like the ones the raptors learned to open in Jurassic Park. Well, my daughter couldn't open it. I assumed it was because my brother was inside holding it shut, playing with her. She tried to open it for a few seconds, and I was just assuming that they were playing. Finally, she opens the door a few inches, and something inside closes them again. At this point, I started to feel a little uneasy and opened the door, but no one was inside. As it turns out, my brother had gone into another room while my daughter came into my mom's room by herself. I didn't say anything because my mom is just starting to get used to staying by herself, and who knows, I guess it could have just been my daughter messing with the doors, but I don't know how else to explain this.